One of the most intriguing questions in all of U.S. men's soccer right now is who is going to be the striker moving forward? That's been a question on everybody's mind since at least the Gold Cup last year and maybe even before that. Hi, my name is Sam and this is the Yank Report, the show where we talk about U.S. men's soccer. We're going to take a deep dive today into the striker pool for the U.S. men's national team. We got a ton of names to talk about, names that you probably know and some that you might not, some that you might be really excited about. But before we do that, guys, thank you so much for watching the channel. The channel's growing so much lately. Please hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, and for sure, do like you've been doing, comment on all the videos. I will respond to every single comment until it gets too crazy. Too crazy. All right, let's jump in with the number 9 that I think has been the heir apparent since the U17 World Cup, or the U20 World Cup in 2017. Gyasi Zardes. Josh burst onto the scene in that U20 World Cup whenever he was a young player playing up, and he was the second highest goal scorer in that tournament, and he was an absolute machine. Following that tournament, Josh signed a contract with Werder Bremen. He had to wait until he turned 18 until he could play, and for all the world, we all thought that that was a done deal. As soon as Jozy Altidore loses a step, or maybe even before that, Josh would be the leading man for the U.S. men's national team right away. Now, it hasn't quite worked out like that. Josh has had a few appearances for the U.S. men's national team, and he just hasn't quite taken hold of the position. So let's take a look at Josh's resume, which honestly is probably the most impressive resume out of the whole bunch. Josh is 20 years old. He is a striker for Werder Bremen. This season, Josh has become an every game starter for the team. Josh has a $9 million value on transfer market, which is the third highest on Werder Bremen and is easily the highest of any striker that we have in our pool. Now, Josh has not scored many goals at all this season. I believe he has 2 in all competitions and 1 in the Bundesliga as of right now. But the reason why Josh keeps getting on the field for Werder is because of his defensive work ethic. The biggest criticism of Josh right now is that he's not scoring goals. Despite his lack of goal contributions, Josh remains a mainstay in the Bremen lineup, and a lot of sporting directors from around the Bundesliga, if you believe the reports, are all very high on the 20-year-old. The big question a lot of American soccer fans have right now is, are we looking at another Weston McKennie situation where maybe he's on a bad team right now, but if he gets a move, he can really shine and blossom and be the player that we all thought he was going to be following the U20 World Cup? That remains to be seen. But as of right now, Josh is a striker, a young 20-year-old striker that has a ton of experience in the Bundesliga but is not scoring goals. Next up on the list is the OG of the group, Jozy Altidore. Now, Jozy is the third highest goal scorer in the history of the national team. Jozy's been the starting striker for the national team since he was about 17 years old, and he is currently 31. The problem with Jozy, as I think we all know at this point, is he's rarely on the field due to injuries. He's had some terrible, terrible hamstring injuries at terrible and opportune times. Jozy's still far and away the best hold-up striker that we have. He still is capable of fantastic passing. He brings a lot of creativity to the field. The question is, though, at 31 years old, is he still mobile enough to really get around? Has the athleticism of the game passed him by? Combine that with the season that Jozy had last year in MLS, where he had 2 goals in 13 appearances. That's not a very good strike rate, and that's not the strike rate you want to see for the number 1 striker for the U.S. men's national team. Now, Jozy has not appeared on a Greg Berhalter roster for quite some time. We don't know if that is because he's allowing him to recover from the season, or if, he just doesn't rate him, or what exactly it is. We'll find out the answers to that pretty soon. But as of right now, I think Jozy might be on the outside looking in the pool. Next up is probably the most controversial name on this list. He is the gatekeeper at this position. His name is Gyasi Zardes. Zardes, of course, highly controversial because of his lack of ball skill and his lack of first touch and his kind of crazy face goals that he's apt to score. But beyond all that, Gyasi is a tireless worker. He makes the runs in behind that Greg Berhalter is looking for. We know that Berhalter has a history with Zardes. Zardes understands the system, and Zardes comes to play every time he suits up for the national team. He doesn't have a very high ceiling, but he doesn't really have a very low floor either. You pretty much get the same Gyasi Zardes every time you roll the ball out. And for a lot of competitions, that's more than enough, especially with the talent that you have around him. Now, considering just the Champions League quality that we have in all the other positions, you would hope that a player would emerge that has a much higher ceiling than Zardes. But as of right now, if you want to be on the national team, you got to be better than Gyasi Zardes. And Gyasi had a pretty prolific season last year in MLS. With a strike rate of 12 goals in 21 games, Gyasi Zardes is that's the bar. That's the bar you got to beat. If you're an MLS striker and you want to be better than Gyasi Zardes and get to the national team, you got to outscore him, and that's not always an easy thing to do. Speaking of MLS, there were two MLS strikers that have created a lot of excitement and buzz last season. Both of them are dual internationals. Both of them got called into the last camp, but only one of them was able to play. That was Ayo Akinola. Ayo Akinola, of course, is a Canadian-American player, and we're not 100% sure which nation he's going to represent. He was recently called into the Canadian national team for a camp, and he accepted that call-up, so we know that he's at least open to becoming a Canadian international, but that remains to be seen. Akinola is 20 years old, and he really burst onto the U.S. men's national team scene, consciousness area, whatever, however you want to say it, whenever he scored 5 goals in 3 games in the MLS's back tournament. He looked like a world beater in that tournament. He was just about unplayable. Akinola finished with 9 goals in 15 games in 2020, a pretty good strike rate, a strike rate that's going to keep you on the international radar. The question is for Akinola, will he represent the U.S. men's national team? At 20 years old, he's a young guy. He's got a lot of career ahead of him, but he's also got 20-year-old Josh Sargent. There's a lot of other young strikers that we're about to get into that are competing for that same position. Does he want to go the route of Canada, where he'll have a little bit easier route to the starting position where he can play in a lot more games, or does he want to take the risk choosing the U.S. men's national team? You have a better chance of playing in a World Cup, better chance of playing in bigger competitions. Does he back himself for that? That's something that we'll see moving forward. The other 20-year-old MLS striker that everyone is excited about right now is Daryl Dike. Dike, of course, is the big, physical, fast striker with an absolute cannon of a foot that is just tearing up the league right now. Dike, just like a lot of the other players on this list, is a dual international. He can represent USA. He can also represent Nigeria. Dike has a transfer market value of $3 million currently, and he scored 8 goals in 17 appearances in 2020. One of the biggest disappointments of the last U.S. men's national team camp was that although Dike was called in, he had to withdraw for injury-related reasons. As of right now, Dike is one of the guys that's really beaten down the door for a roster spot for the U.S. men's national team. Now let's get into some very exciting players, some youth prospects, some guys that have been getting a lot of hype recently. And let's start at the top with the guy who's probably getting the most hype of any young youth U.S. international prospect, and that is Folarin Balogun. Folarin is a Arsenal player who kind of burst onto the scene wherever he got some appearances in the Europa League and ended up scoring 2 Europa League goals for Arsenal. Now, Folarin has not made a debut for the Arsenal full team in the Premier League, but he's playing pretty well in the EPL too. Now, just like just about all these other players, Balogun is a dual international. He can represent England, he can represent USA, and as of right now, I haven't seen any indication that he's interested in representing the USA. I haven't seen any tweets that say, like, I'm open to representing either country or anything like that. That might be out there, but I just haven't seen it at the moment. However, you got to consider Balogun's position right now. I mean, the English national team has some pretty good strikers at the top, so he's not getting in there anytime soon, but they also have a ton of quality strikers that are young. You look at guys like Tammy Abraham, Dominic Calvert-Lewin, Mason Greenwood. There's a ton of young English strikers that might make it pretty difficult for Balogun to see any minutes for the national team anytime soon or anytime in the future. He does have a $4 million value on transfer market, which is pretty good for a 19-year-old that doesn't have a ton of top-level experience. So there are a lot of people that are high on Balogun. We don't quite know what he's going to be, but he's definitely an interesting prospect going forward. Another young dual international that people are very excited about is Sebastian Soto. Soto, much like Josh Sargent, had a huge U20 World Cup that really burst him onto the scene, but it's been kind of tough sledding for Soto. Soto started out his career in Germany and was unable to find minutes. He got transferred to Norwich and then loaned out to Telstar, which is in the 2nd division of the Eredivisie. Either way, Soto's doing exactly what he needs to be doing. He's scoring goals every time he gets an opportunity, and as a striker, how much more can you ask? So if you know anything about tracking young soccer prospects, you know that the younger they are, the more hype and sizzle that's going to be around them. So we're going to get into 2 guys who are very young but have a ton of hype. And that first one is Ricardo Pepi. Ricardo Pepi is a 17-year-old at FC Dallas who has been a guy that people have pointed at for a long time as possibly the next big thing for U.S. soccer. Pepe is a dual international. He is a Mexican-American. Pepe is a big boy at 6'1". He's a powerful guy. He's an athletic guy. He's a guy that at the striker position still likes to spray the ball around the pitch and then gets into the box and likes to get in on the end of anything he can get his foot on. Despite being so young and not having a ton of experience, Pepe has a $1 million transfer fee value on transfer market, which is pretty significant for a young player. The disappointing thing for Pepe is that so many of the youth tournaments where players like Soto and Sargent really made a name for themselves have been canceled due to COVID-19. So he's not going to have the same opportunities to really show off on the world stage against players his own age the way that some of the guys that came before him did. So from a 17-year-old, let's go to a 16-year-old, and that is 16-year-old Malick Sanogo. Sanogo is a player for the U17 Union Berlin youth team. He's a player that is playing very well, kind of lighting it up in their youth organization, moving up the ranks quickly. Whether or not Malick ultimately chooses the United States or the Ivory Coast to represent as an international remains to be seen. However, he is a very exciting prospect and one that everybody should be keeping an eye on moving forward. Now, one player that I haven't mentioned that people in the comments section might be screaming about right now is Aron Johannsson. You know, Johannsson was a player that had so much promise, but really had his career derailed due to injury. He's currently scoring goals in the Swedish First Division right now for Hammarby. However, you know, there's rumors that he might be getting a transfer to MLS, and we've seen in the last few U.S. men's national team games that Greg Berhalter has not called him in. It doesn't seem like he's in the plans moving forward. So we've talked about just about every striker that I can think of that is being mentioned right now that could possibly be a striker for the U.S. men's national team. Now I got a couple of wild cards for you. These are guys that are not normally lining up as strikers, but are players that a lot of people think maybe, you know, with the issues that we're having a striker, maybe they can line up there. And the first one that I'm going to mention is going to be Weah. Timothy Weah is a 20-year-old American international. His career has been derailed over a little bit over the past few years due to injuries, but he's back in the first team and he is back scoring goals. Now, the thing about Weah is he doesn't normally line up as a striker. He mostly plays as a winger. Now, according to Who Scored, he has not lined up as a striker at all this season for Lille. Although, you know, he hasn't played too many games. Timo often takes up striker positions on the field. He often drifts in that direction. And one thing that I don't think you can argue with is that he makes the best, smoothest runs in behind of anybody in the pool. You know, if you watch Timo's highlights, he's got a lot of breakaway goals. And the reason for that is because he's just so good at running off the back shoulder of defenders. Now, Timo is not a player that's playing a lot at the striker position. I don't know if he's got the hold-up capability. He's not really known for being a header of the ball. Strength is not really a part of his game. But he can be a speedy forward that gets in behind, that looks for balls over the top. And he's really, really good with the ball at his feet. He's also pretty good at finishing. Another guy very similar to Timo Weah in that regard would be Jordan Morris. Of course, Morris started out his U.S. men's national team career as a striker, but since has moved out to the wing and has saw his career in MLS blossom. Jordan is consistently one of the best players in MLS. He's one of the best wingers in MLS. His ability to create from the outside is phenomenal. I don't see Jordan as someone who's going to move back to striker just because of how prolific he's been from his winger position. However, he's absolutely an option if you're Greg Berhalter and you're desperate. And last but not least is one of the guys who I see lined up in the striker position in a lot of these sexy U.S. men's national team lineups where you're trying to fit all the best players on the team you possibly can, and that's Gio Reyna. Now, Gio Reyna has at times lined up in that false nine position for Dortmund, and he does have a lot of the qualities that you would hope for out of a false nine. You know, he's very strong out there on the field. He's very good at playing with his back to goal. He's very good at dribbling the ball in tight spaces, finding players. And, you know, if you have guys like Timo Weah and Christian Pulisic on the wings, that is a very interesting option. All right, guys, that's it for me. That's the entire U.S. men's national team striker pool, at least the players that I see getting a lot of buzz and getting called into camps and people are talking about right now. I'm sure there's others. I'm sure you're going to put in the comment section, hey, what about this guy? What about this guy? What about this guy? Thank you so much for watching the video. Thank you so much to everybody who's been subscribing lately. The channel's been growing a lot, and I thank you guys so much. Please continue to like and and comment and do all those good things. My name is Sam, and this is the Yank Report.